ya? Welcome to Happy Rails to ya. My name is Hobo Pep, and I've been riding the rails looking for an adventure to share with you. Boy, have I got a story for you today. Let me find a place to rest these weary bones. We'll see what treasure I've got for you in my bindle. You know, my hobo sack. Come along. Welcome back to my hobo jungle. It's so good to see you again this week. Can you believe that we are another week closer to Thanksgiving? Mark my words, the older you get, the faster time flies by. And when you reach my age, you'll think you're on one of those high-speed railroads overseas that travels over 200 miles per hour. And as Thanksgiving is less than 2 weeks away now, we continue our Thanksgiving series this week with an exciting adventure appropriately titled The Thanksgiving Train. Now, as we read through today's adventure, pay close attention to all the ways that Engineer Clarence lends a helping hand as he and his train steamer are trying to make it home through a snowstorm for Thanksgiving dinner with his wife, Martha. Come along, let's read. The Thanksgiving Train, written by Richard L. Stein and illustrated by Mary Coons. Clarence was the engineer. Steamer was the engine. Together, they ran a little passenger train ride all around Sweetwood's amusement park. Both the man and the engine were getting old. Steamer had many leaks and some awful squeaks, and Clarence had creaks of his own. He also had a cold. The weather was getting chilly. Clarence had worked at the park since spring. Now it was almost Thanksgiving. The weather had been very warm during the fall, so the park had stayed open longer than usual. Finally, when the park manager told Clarence to pack up and go home, he didn't argue. So, early on a blustery cold morning, Clarence moved the throttle forward and urged little Steamer to take them home. With smoke pouring from its deck and steam leaking from its belly, the engine began pulling its one passenger out of the park. Clarence waved goodbye to all his friends. He pulled a cord. The whistle blew. He was on his way home to his wife, and Steamer was headed to the big barn where he could rest for the winter. Clarence picked up the train's phone as the little engine chugged away from the park. "Hello, Martha? It's Clarence. I'm on my way home, and I, cough sniffle, can't wait for Thanksgiving dinner." "Oh, goodness, I haven't been to the grocery yet, and it's beginning to snow here," replied his wife. "Well, we should be home in a few hours," said Clarence. "Would you pick me up at the train barn? You'd better bring the station wagon if the weather is bad." Clarence sneezed. "Sounds like you need a nice hot cup of tea and some rest. Hurry home," said Martha with worry in her voice. Clarence was feeding wood into Steamer's hungry boiler belly. They had traveled only a couple of miles when snowflakes began falling lightly. The temperature was much colder, and Clarence kept his head inside the cab except when he peered down the tracks. Suddenly, Clarence spotted something near the tracks ahead. He pulled the brake handle, brought Steamer to a stop, and stepped down from the engine. Just a few feet away was a small deer with one of its hooves stuck under a rail. Clarence calmed the frightened fawn and gently removed enough gravel under the track to free its foot. The little deer limped so badly and looked so weak that Clarence picked it up, setting it gently in the cozy little cab. He took some salve from the first aid kit and rubbed it on the hoof of the deer. Then he pulled out one of his many handkerchiefs and wrapped it around the frightened animal's hurt foot. The snow was coming down harder, and Clarence urged Steamer to go faster. Above the noise of the engine, Clarence heard an unusual sound. He looked hard ahead through the snowflakes and saw something moving awkwardly toward the tracks. Once more, Clarence stopped Steamer and got out to investigate. It took a while for him to figure out what he was seeing. A beaver was pulling a cage used for trapping animals, and his big, flat tail was stuck in the door of the cage. He looked cold, tired, and scared because he was cold, tired, and scared. Very carefully, the kind engineer shuffled over to the beaver and whispered, "Don't be afraid, little fella." Clarence stared at the animal's very large teeth and carefully pried open the cage door. Now free, the beaver simply sat and shivered. Clarence shrugged his shoulders, picked up the sniffling beaver, and placed him in the cab. He settled into the driver's seat and slowly pushed the throttle. Ker-chug, ker-chug, ker-choo. It was snowing hard now. The world outside the little engine was white. Clarence checked the small deer who was curled up close to the firebox. He pulled out yet another hanky and wiped the fawn's nose. "I do believe we're a pretty sick bunch," declared Clarence. The beaver sneezed and Clarence coughed. Steamer belched a ker-chug, ker-choo. Clarence added more wood to the boiler. "This stopping and starting is slowing us down," said the old train driver. He stuck his head out of the cab for a look ahead, but quickly pulled back. The blowing snow stung his face. Steamer was sounding very weak and tired, so Clarence slowed the train a little more. Clarence could still see the countryside outside the train, but the snow was thicker now, and the air was downright freezing. Clarence dug into his suitcase and pulled out some heavy clothes. He placed a warm jacket on the deer and wrapped an old plaid flannel shirt around the coughing beaver. "I feel like a nurse," muttered Clarence. He opened the boiler doors and added another armload of wood. Clarence was sick but busy. He checked the gauges. He checked the animals. He checked the weather. Once again, he saw something move outside the little train. What appeared to be a large snowball came rolling downhill toward the tracks. He stopped the train, stepped down, and watched the giant snowball roll toward him. It stopped at his feet. Clarence could see two small eyes and a nose. "There's something inside," he exclaimed as he bent to pick it up. "Ouch!" Clarence dropped the pumpkin-sized snowball. Bending over, he noticed little needles sticking out all over. "It's a porcupine!" shouted Clarence. Thinking fast, Clarence grabbed a shovel from the cab and gently lifted the live snowball into the compartment. He carefully placed it in the cab's warmest spot and with a sigh once more pushed the handle and moved Steamer forward. "We're running behind schedule and we're using too much wood," complained Clarence. The phone rang and Martha reported that the weather was very bad at home. "Same here," shouted Clarence above the noise of the train, the storm, and the animals. "Don't worry, we'll all be okay." "All?" questioned Martha. "Long story," said Clarence. "See ya at the train barn whenever we get there." Onward the little train struggled. There was plenty of sneezing and wheezing from the passengers. The porcupine was defrosting, and Clarence wiped up the puddle with yet another handkerchief. He checked the fawn's foot and gently rubbed the beaver's back. Clarence felt a sneeze come on, grabbed his hanky, and he blew. As he wiped his nose, he clearly heard ker-chug, ker-chug, ker-choo. So Steamer was growing sicker, and the fawn was coughing too. The old man's ears were tightly tuned to ker-chug, ker-chug, ker-choo. The beaver's tail was trembling, and his nose sneezed right on cue. But Clarence was most worried about Kerchug, Kerchug, Kerchoo. The porcupine was shaken. With his head a shade of blue, above the sounds of the animals came Kerchug, Kerchug, Kerchoo. Slowly the train struggled down the track. Clarence could hardly see anything outside as he put the last pieces of wood into the boiler. "We're running out of fuel and we're running out of luck," he said to the little critters huddled together. And then the train struck something and shuddered to a stop. Clarence stumbled out of the cab with the little beaver following behind him. There, blocking the train, was a large fallen tree. As Clarence waded through the snow around the tree, he heard a clicking sound. Looking down, he spied the little beaver using his big teeth to saw through the branches. As the beaver chopped the wood, Clarence hauled the tree chunks to the little engine storage box. It was soon filled. Clarence picked up the beaver and loaded the tired little animal back on board. As he put some of the new wood into the boiler, he noticed the snow was letting up a bit, but the outside was still awfully white. "We must be getting close to home," he said with hope. Clarence listened to all the sounds around him, the whirling of the wind, the sneezing of the passengers, the kerchug, kerchooing of the engine. He pushed the throttle half open, and then he heard another sound, a loud thump at the front of the train. Steamer shuddered a little bit, but kept on chugging down the tracks. "Must have hit a snowdrift," thought Clarence. He made a quick decision. He opened up the throttle and hollered, "Take us home, steamer, take us home." "Hello, dear." Martha was standing beside the station wagon at the train barn, all bundled up with scarves and gloves and boots. Clarence had just crawled from the tired little train. He was followed by a beaver painfully dragging his tail, a bluish porcupine stiffly waddling along, and a limping baby deer. "Oh, for goodness sakes," cried Martha. "What in the world is that?" "Those are all stories," said Clarence. "No, I mean, what is that?" repeated Martha, pointing toward the engine. Clarence turned around. "Good heavens," he shouted. A large turkey was flattened against the front of the train. The bird was all white with snow and frozen stiff. That was the thump that Clarence had ignored. Clarence hurried to the panting engine and gawked at the big silent bird. "Well, Martha," he chuckled, "Thanksgiving is very close, and I knew you hadn't been to the grocery." "Oh, Clarence, don't talk like that. Let's get these poor animals into the cozy car." Clarence then guided little Steamer into the warm train barn and wished him a speedy recovery. When he came out, he was carrying the big frozen bird. "Take us home, Martha. Take us home," he repeated. It was dinner time on Thanksgiving Day. Clarence and his new friends were seated at the table. All of them had recovered nicely and were eagerly awaiting the main course. "Is everyone ready?" asked Martha, with excitement in her voice. "Yes," said Clarence. Everyone leaned closer to the table. "Here comes the feast!" exclaimed Martha. Out came the turkey, proudly carrying the Thanksgiving meal. "Hooray!" yelled Clarence. The fawn, porcupine, and beaver made all sorts of gleeful sounds. Clarence said a small prayer of thanks, and they all feasted on vegetables, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and of course, pumpkin pie. Thanksgiving was wonderful. By the following spring, Steamer was feeling much better and was once more taking passengers around the little amusement park in the woods. But Clarence was not the engineer. Clarence had a new job, and the park had a new attraction, a petting zoo. Clarence was the zookeeper and Martha was his partner. Can you guess who the first animals were in the zoo? The end. That's the Thanksgiving train. Now, didn't that adventure make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, even though Engineer Clarence and Steamer were battling bad weather all the way home? You see, Clarence, he remembered the golden rule, which says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Although he was battling a cold and Steamer was worn out and ready for some rest, they stopped and helped the fawn, beaver, and the porcupine and brought them along as they headed home. Clarence and Martha, they showed the true spirit of Thanksgiving as they extended hospitality to this unlikely new batch of friends and enjoyed a hearty meal with their new family. And what about that turkey that was stuck on Steamer's cowcatcher? You thought it was gonna be served up on a big platter for Thanksgiving dinner, didn't you? Well, I have to admit that I thought for sure they were all gonna be eating some hot, juicy turkey legs and breasts, but instead they asked the turkey to join the celebration. They were thankful that they were able to feast on the next best thing, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Well, that's it for now. Be sure to join me next week for our final adventure in our Thanksgiving series as we learn about a historic feast served up to passengers stranded on the Union Pacific Railroad during a snowstorm back in 1896. And you won't believe who's hosting the Thanksgiving meal. Until next time, so long. Thank you for joining me for today's adventure. I hope you enjoyed. Always remember, continue riding the rails of your imagination as it will take you on an endless number of adventures around the world. Until next time, this is Hobo Pap saying so long as I go hop on a rattler in search of our next adventure. Happy rails to you.